Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing good. We are Giant Combat, and welcome to our final presentation. This is our very talented and dedicated team, and our wonderful faculty instructors, Mike and Ricardo. So, Giant Combat is a student pitch project that attempts to answer the question: how can melee combat in virtual reality against a large-scale enemy or LSE feel comfortable, satisfying, and cool? So, our goals. We wanted to explore melee combat against a large-scale enemy in virtual reality throughout the course of this semester, and we wanted to develop high-fidelity prototypes using Valve Index hardware and the Unreal Engine. So talking about our progress at HALVES, our first prototype was centered on climbing, as in rock climbing, and swinging around using grappling hooks. There was a lot of emphasis on loom response and making sure that the player felt the daunting size of the enemy. We also wanted to establish a solid framework for traversal and basic combat mechanics. Next. So the feedback that we received was that combat was not emphasized enough and it was not a core feature in our initial hookshot prototype. Also, the interaction with the large-scale enemy was very limited. The other feedback that we got was that we were not taking enough risks and we were being too conservative in our exploration. And to fix this, we needed to start thinking outside the box. And now Simon is going to talk about how we proceeded with the rest of the semester.
Thanks, Ron. So right after half, we immediately built a prototype include a translucent LSE to verify the theory that we put out during the half, which is our players seldom get motion sickness because they're not seeing the horizon. After creating this experience, we found out that motion sickness still remains a non-issue. For limited amount of testing does not appear to be the case. Our submission for this is being task-oriented and focused is a psychological aid in preventing motion sickness. Also, by visibly being able to see one section on top of or underneath another is relatively confusing and strange to create a map, and thus traversal become much harder. In terms of loop response that we always focused on, the translucent texture is creating a less daunting LSE, and by proxy, the loom response suffers. Next, please. Yes. After finishing this, and before we move on to our second prototype, there are some change in our methodologies. Because of the situation, we are not able to have enough external testing to use the tool that we create before half to generate a heat map. And we'll also change our workflow from weekly sprint according to question that we want to answer to working on to create a moment that impresses our player. And with all that, it's time to move on to our second prototype, the one that emphasizes more on the combat part. For designing this, we really looked at interesting fantasies and out-of-the-box mechanism. Eventually, we landed on the powerful hand idea, which we thought could utilize strings of Vibe index in simulating hands. We also built a short punching moment to see if we can build off it. We got a lot of useful feedback on this prototype during the playtest days, and next Ziheng will talk more about this.
Zahang, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Thanks, Simon. In this prototype, we're seeking answers for a crucial question. How does the punching interaction with LSE feels like? We tested our punching movement in ETC playtest day. Good things about this moment is that you definitely feel visceral and powerful as a player, but we still need more context and explanation about where and how is this moment coming from. And also adding more feedback when the player or the LSE gets hit. Next, please. In order to make the punch moment feels powerful and realistic, we decided to make it as a final earned moment of the whole experience. In our design, the player will raise up his power level so he can finally defeat the LSE in the end. Also, we made a world that provides more narrative context and also explain the logic of why this final punching moment makes sense. Next, please. In this second half of the semester, we are building prototypes that address combat So in our definition, combat with a large-scale enemy is not strictly attacking each other, but also including dodging the incoming attacks from the LC, assessing the current situation, planning a strategy, and finding opportunities to take down the opponent. Having all of these, just making the combat with the LC more alive and believable. Next, I will hand over to Jiajun to talk about the combat in details.
Yeah, thanks, Ziheng. So with a clear definition of what is combat, we have features in mind that we need to implement, which lead us back to considering movement. While combat is our focus, movement is still a wider aspect of it. Huge power difference between player and LSE requires the team to make the dodging moment close and intense, where a constant dashing mechanism seems to be a good fit. We tried out 3 different dashing mechanisms to see the best one, which works with our fantasy, and lock on the one that player can grab the crystal in distance and dash to it, which is not only fairly innovative in this field, but also fit the later traversing goal better. Other than movement, we also take risk in other forms to explore the topic. With bigger goals for a more polished experience, we think riskier options could teach us more important lessons. We removed hookshot and even the sword from the previous one to really emphasize the power of hand, but also place the team in a place that we are away from what we knew. We introduced a rock form bird as a new type of enemy to serve as tutorial for punching UI, while also seeking the question whether will this take focus away from LSE. Even though the old LSE is well liked, we still try to design a new LSE to tie into the world better, which also provided us more learnings of the production difficulties. As soft, we received many useful feedbacks. To make it clear, the new LSE was not finished at that time, so we still used the old one for the demo. On the good side, the game flow of the level, which starts from the spiral bridge and later to the LSE, is good, and power dynamic is well established, and the final punching moment do make sense now. However, without certain context, the bird's enemy didn't work. Concern of making a new LSE do exist since the old one is well liked. We were all grateful for the positive feedbacks and decided to try our best to address the problem in our final changes. Here are the final changes we made. We complete the experience by adding the intro and final moment. The connection between birds and LSE is established to make them more cohesive, not only in art style, but also in a more organic interaction. Some VFX is added to amplify the feedback even more, and we changed the LSE model. We have a short demo video for this prototype. Please enjoy.
Thanks, Jiajun. So as with any project, this one came with its own set of challenges. For instance, when the new LSE was implemented, we realized that the textures up close became pixelated. This was an issue that with a little bit more time, we would have loved to test more textures. Lots of moving objects can also lead to performance issues, and having stable frames per second is extremely vital, especially in an intimate experience such as virtual reality. This was something we tried to solve early on, and we were able to keep pretty stable. Intimate collisions are also super important. Clipping due to the physics system in place can really take the player out of the experience. And that's actually one of the reasons why we decided to design the LSE the way we did with floating parts so as to prevent that. Detailed interactions when on the LSE was something that was challenging for us to design. Currently, both of our prototypes have climbing as the answer to that, but more can definitely be explored on that front. And finally, replayability was a challenge we tried to deal with a little bit. Currently, both of our prototypes are very linear, and potentially having more options in which the player can choose to be able to take down the LSE would be something that can be, again, explored later on. And there are also a ton of lessons we learned throughout the course of this semester. For instance, having the LSE rise in some fashion elicits a much better response in the player. This hits on that physiological loom response we talked about before, and really hits on the sense of scale as well as keywords we had at HALVES, such as daunting and gigantic. Movement, as we explained, is also such an important part of the combat experience, whether it's flying around on hook shots or doing some form of ground dashing. Feeling free and having a movement mechanism that works into the power fantasy, super vital for the experience. The LSE design is also important, whether it's having some kind of eye or head tracking to see where the LSE is looking, or working on organic movements and rates of animation to make the LSE more alive. All of this brings you more into the experience. And finally, different ranges of interaction can amplify the sense of scale as well, whether it's approaching the LSE or when you're actually on the LSE and seeing the environment swirl around you. All of these little details work together to not only make the world seem big, but also the LSE. And before we end, we just wanted to give a shout out to some very special people, Janice, Steve, and all the ETC staff for making this COVID-19 transition as easy and seamless as possible. All of the playtesters from the first half of the semester that were able to come into our project room and give us vital feedback. Various online communities we reached out with to this project, including Virtual Reality, Valve Index, VR Dev, Oculus, and Vive. And finally, Ruth, Drew, Chris, and Jesse for giving us such in-depth feedback for softs. And also, I found out it's Teacher Appreciation Week, so everyone gets a big thank you. And in summary, we are Giant Combat, a student pitch project exploring melee combat against a large-scale enemy in virtual reality, and we are now open for questions.
All right, good job, team. Yay, y'all did a great job. And Dave's gonna help moderate Q&A.
Go ahead, Mo.
Yeah, I don't know if you got to this, but can you talk a little bit about how lighting affected the experience and how you used it both from an art direction point of view, but also just navigating the experience?
I think Zihong, do you want to talk a little bit about like the lighting you put like for like you said like for the shadow and the bright side of it?
Oh, okay, yeah. So we want to put the so the lighting is basically to light up the place that the goal where the goal is. For example, when you see the spiral bridge, the first half of the bridge is shadowed, but the second half of the bridge is lightened. So it's generally like give a indication for players to just want to go someplace bright. And also the lighting direction also have a good view of the background ancient ruins. Like you can see the shape and the whole environment, and it's basically that's how we use the lighting. Hello?
Any other questions?
I got a question. You touched on it a little bit in the presentation, but I'm kind of curious if you had any more specifics about how you designed the second LSE based on lessons learned from the semester.
So the question is like how we design the LSE based on the lessons we learned. I guess like basically the first LSE we created is mostly like a placeholder to test, so we can get something early on that we can play with to have playtesters in to test these experiences. But like later on, actually the design is more focusing on whether changing the model with like a more high poly model with like more detailed texture, whether will this work, because we have like an initial hypothesis this will be like a crucial problem in our project, because our LSE is really big, and we know like with amplified models to like maybe like 40 or 50 times than its original size, it's going to cause the texture to be like aliasing. So we saw like this could be a problem. So that's partially the reason why we want to test with new boss. But like in case of the design, I guess the only thing we take from the previous one is like how we managing the climbing route to make them I feel you always know where to go next. And also like for the art style is just to make them more cohesive with the environment art. So
Thanks.
Time for one more. All right, thanks team, really good job. Hey.